Getting an individual ready for succession or taking up future roles is a very important aspect for any business, and specifically as a leader or as a managing director or chief executive, one of the main aspects you will be required to perform to ensure business continuity. It's a very complex activity, and I'm sure it requires a specialist to execute this. So if you are entering into succession management, make sure that you do have a specialist advisor with you, whether as part of your internal human resource team or an external consultant. The rulebook of, the playbook of succession would clearly say that how do we get a person succession ready or a future role ready, giving them exposure to new roles, promoting them to projects which are critical projects, giving them leadership roles in non-line function or support functions, and giving them high amount of training or some critical trainings. Basically, you start giving them exposure, providing them mentorship by leaders as well as other organization leaders within and outside the organization. This is what the playbook says. It's not a right or a wrong answer to the method used, and most of the organization would be doing that, looking at high performers, looking at individuals who are currently delivering at their roles and identifying them as future leaders, by whatever name you may call it, future leaders program or high potential program, whatever, and then giving them mentorship benefits, the exposure to critical projects, providing them trainings, providing them opportunity to lead groups and lead organizations, and therefore seeing that as you do all this, it's going to make them ready for a future role. It could be or it may not also. So what do we say when we say that you need to get a succession ready? What is it that needs to be done? So preparing for succession is not so much about what exposures need to be given for performing the present role. Succession ready means that what is it that the future role for which you're identifying the person, what are the expectations or deliveries that are required from the future role, and for that future role you give exposure to a present set of people, and how those present set of people perform for something which is going to be demanded in future is what we then say is going to be the identifier, or trying to see that okay, these people are trying to now move up the value chain. Let us try to understand this by way of an example. If you're looking at somebody who's going to be hired as who's going to be made a chief executive officer in future from a pharmaceuticals or company in the present scenario, where there is a huge amount of pressure in terms of pharmaceuticals to do research, to come up with new drugs, and to also ensure that they are competitive in the global environment because of a lot of research focus and a lot of marketing focus being put on the pharma industry. So you are practically looking at somebody who's got the ability to, or who will be required to, as a CEO, be very understanding and very innovative in terms of marketing ideologies, understanding competitive landscape, understanding how and what goes into pharma research, understanding what kind of a technology is needed to ensure that you are up to date and ahead of the curve in terms of pharma research. Irrespective of what the role the person is performing today, the CEO would be expected to at least be competitive in terms of their knowledge in these 3 to 4 aspects. As a succession management program or succession management tool, the organization would look at, let's say, 3, 4, 5 people whom they believe are going to be looked at for succession to the CEO from within or outside the organization, and try to gauge them on these parameters. So the tools that they will develop would be designed to understand these, not what the person is performing at the present role. The trainings and the exposures that will be given to individual would be for what a CEO is supposed to do in this organization, not what the person is doing right now and how they are demonstrating high level of expertise in that. So your training focus or your mentorship focus or your exposure focus is not so much going to be focused on trying to ensure that the person is walking up a value chain or walking up a ladder. Your focus is going to be more in terms of trying to see what are the skills that a CEO requires. I don't care whether those skills are present with the individual today or not. How do I give those exposure or training, whether by way of a classroom or on-the-job training, of those skills, or how do I make sure that the individual starts having those skills? Once the individual has those skills to a certain degree, then you start measuring those skills and then identify amongst all the 4-5 people who I gave this training or exposure on acquiring these skills, these are the people who are higher, and therefore I would like them to take up the position and the others will not take up the position. One of the questions that we get asked is that's what we do when we try and identify people who are high performing, because they start demonstrating the roles or the skills that a CEO would require, and we identify it right now, and therefore we title them into a high potential or a high performance person. We won't state whether that's a right or a wrong approach. What we're trying to say is that you do not identify people for succession by way of skills or deliveries. What you identify people is on behavioral attributes. Once you have figured out a behavioral attribute, that the person has certain kind of behavioral attributes which a CEO or a person who's going to be successful in our organization or who's going to gel in our culture needs to have, then you start giving them exposure to the skills. A skill at even a COO level is going to be very different than a skill at a CEO level. It's going to be very rare that you will find somebody who's a COO demonstrating the skills of a CEO which are visible to you, and then you believe that this person will be able to perform at the level of a CEO. If such a situation does exist in your organization, then you've got some issues with the job descriptions, because you practically then are having an overlapping role, unless that's by design, because some organizations do have a design that way that you would have certain roles overlapping so that it's easier for us to move up the value chain. So succession management is a complex role. It is preparing a person for a future role by giving them that future training today. That training may or may not help them in the present role at all, which typically means in a worst case scenario, a person who's being prepared for a future role may end up becoming an underperformer in the present role. How you ensure that they become high performer will require a different kind of an intervention, but it should not be mixed with a succession training or a succession plan or a succession module or a succession program.